wait a couple of minutes.
Hello ma'am, thank you for the talk. You briefly mentioned that one of your chapters is actually about the conception of peoplehood and how the young Bengal are, as you suggested, the first group of Indians to assert peoplehood, so to say. So my question would be, did they also reconfigure the entire conception of peoplehood as we understand it in the Indian context? Because, well, we understand that they were doing this agentive role, that they are studying texts and they are asserting something. But peoplehood is not only that. So Partho Chatterjee has popularized the fact that Rabindranath Tagore was so much uncomfortable with the use of the word public, and what he elides is that after 20 or 30 years, Tagore himself comes up with this word called Lokolokhi, and there was Anandamohan Bose who was coming up with the concept of Sushil Samaj, and of course others like Tagore and Keshav Chandra Sen and others. So what the moot point of all this exercise was that the prime accusation from the part of the British to the Indians was that they can't self-govern because there was no conception of peoplehood within them. So they are just a population, they are not people. Because peoplehood comprises of two things. On one hand, an agential assertion, and on the other hand, giving up of that agency for the sake of a greater good, for the sake of the collective. So there is this dual action that is involved. And the reaction on the part of the nationalists to this accusation of the British was that they went on to search for very Indian conceptions of peoplehood itself, and which actually comes up in the forms which I mentioned in Tagore's ideas, or like Anandamohan Bose and others, which eventually does not happen. That's unfortunate. But I am seeing that is such kind of an exercise there in case of Young Bengal also, or it is an entirely different paradigm of peoplehood entirely. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. I had the opportunity of going through one of your earlier works as well, The Gentleman Poets of Bengal. And I'm thinking of that in context of what you presented here. Because in Gentleman Poets, you talk about Ishwar Gupta or Shambhat Prabhakar. And you also show, and many others have also shown, that how he was, while being a journalist, he was a very radical person in terms of raising questions related to colonial economic policy. But at the same time, he was also a social conservative. Now, coming to Young Bengal, what intrigues me is that while you can certainly classify them as radicals, but they also had a very ambiguous relationship with the so-called conservative sections whom you talk about. Like, for example, Radhakanta Dev or Ram Kamal Sen, or even the later generation of the Hindu college students like Rajnarayan Bosu and Bhudev Mukherjee. So how do you see this evolution of Young Bengal? Do you think that the reason why Young Bengal reduced its radicalism was not an outcome of necessarily retreat or defeat, but rather an accommodation and negotiation between the both sides, the so-called radicals and the so-called conservatives, when they realized that while they might have their differences over socio-religious questions, they can still contribute to educational initiatives and economic enterprises when it comes to the development of the country.
There's someone else there.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation, and thank you to all the discussants here. You had mentioned about India's first young radical. The thing is that whenever we will see the activities of these young radical people, the young Bengal people, we can see that they are doing something which is like an adventurism for the youth whenever they have been the students of the Hindu college. But if we see the apple, how they are creating an apple to the people or to the mass, we can see that they are not creating an apple to the mass. They are creating an apple to a particular group of educated people. Maybe we can refer to them as public, who are so-called the educated people of Bengal. So whenever you are saying that India's first young radicals, so and whenever you had also mentioned that they had an aspiration for India, but we are talking about the period when India was still in the making. So those people who were the adventurers of Bengal, so can we tell them that they were the true young radicals or the first young radicals of India when India was still in as a nation in the making? And secondly, if we try to trace the lives, the biographical sketches of all these people like Michael Rosinka Chaudhuri and all those people, we can see changes in the way how they are they are just seeing their lives. And whenever they are seeing the moments of crisis, they are still depending upon the traditional modernizer like Vidyasham. And in fact, they had some connections with, as Datta had said, that they had some connection with some of the conservatives like Adagandute. So do you think that they are the true radicalists, how Fox of the Whig party had defined classical radicalism? Or was those people can be explained as some people who had just tried to accommodate various voices together very consciously? Thank you.
So thank you for that question about the people. The reason why I make this argument that a new category is coming into existence, the people of India, is so there are various positions I'm taking against the established view. See, one of the things that I have known since my first book, Gentleman Poet, somebody referred to that, is that surprisingly, if you look at Bengal for instance, modern literary writing, and in the 19th century of course the premier form was poetry, comes into existence first in English and then in the Bengali language. So Dirozio publishes in 1827. He is definitely an Indian poet. You've read in school those sonnets, right? To India, my native land, a half of India. We have it prescribed, at least we had it prescribed certainly. So here is a man, regardless of whether he's Luso-Indian or what blood he has in his veins, he's identifying as an Indian. So this is the first Indian poet. This from Dirozio onwards, so all the poets that I looked at were poets who wrote in English. And it is only afterwards, from the 1850s, that in the work of Ishwar Gupta, Ramgopal Bandyopadhyay, Michael Madhusudan, that people then begin to write in Bangla. That sort of made me comfortable with the thought when I was looking at this archive that the people of India, although so then I looked at them because this is something of concern that what about the Bangla? I know only the Bangla. I mean, I couldn't go searching for all the and in any case, newspapers, newsprint in this time, 1830 is quite limited. But if you look at the Bengali archive, I saw then that the foremost journalist of the time was Ishwar, and the most popular daily was Shambat Prabhakar. Again and again, and here I'm not even looking at the 1830s, because actually you don't have, the Shambat Prabhakar is not available in the archives for the 1830s. You can only see it from the late 1840s, mid 1840s, and then 1850s onward. Again and again, the word he is using is proja, subject. Raman Roy, when he speaks about the people, speaks also of proja. So there is this sense of the equality of man, this sense that all the people are one people. This is being articulated, whether we like it or not. And this is the thing, as Indians we don't like it, we don't want to say it, but it is the fact, and we should hang on to that fact, because it's important, and I'll come to why. It is being articulated in English language publications, press, by this group as in the English language as the people of India. It is coming into existence there to be used as a phrase to denote all the people who live in this country, and also I think, and I've argued, in a self-divided way. So if we look, when I look closely at Dukhi Naranjan's speech, I also show, for instance, how the people is being used in two senses. We are the people, and unless we do something about it, nothing will change, he says. And then he also says, the people of the soil, we have to improve their condition. So there are the people out there, and there are we, the people, who must act. I think the conception of the people has been divided, self-divided in this way from the start. I was just saying this, in fact, to somebody who came to speak at the center, whose book I know, and he has written a book called Waiting for the People. It's been published by Harvard University Press, Najmul Sultan. Najmul presented on his book, and this is a discussion that I had with him as well, and I think we were in agreement that yes, there's always this sense of we the people who must act, and they the people for whom we must act. It is happening in the English language. There's no point in being embarrassed about it or not liking the fact, and that is important, I think, because as I've argued, in fact, I think in the third or fourth page of the introduction, that famous Macaulay quote that all of you are familiar with, that the English once the English language was implemented in 1835 via the minute, it created a class of Indians who, were English in taste, opinions, morals, and intellect, but Indian in blood. The class of interpreters, right? That is in fact the subject of Partho's Fruits of Macaulay's Poisonry. That is what he's talking about. That it is a hollowed out class, and this has been the left rhetoric always. Bishnupriya has it, Shamoshen has it. So what I mean by those two names is one very famous poet and one very famous political activist. There is always this sense of, in Ponchom Bahini, if you read Shamoshen, there is always this sense of our Meet Jafri past. Why? Because we are the fruit of Macaulay's poisonry. Why? Because we are speaking to each other in English, because we are using the English language which Macaulay brought. Firstly, Macaulay didn't bring it, but that's a different argument. 1817, the Hindu college was established with Indian money, and Indians were pretty sure they wanted this kind of education in this kind of language. But also the propagation of that sort of a code to define ourselves does is, it delegitimizes us as a class entirely, which we should not allow to be done to us. It is what leads then to Gandhi's "Abide with me" being taken out from the meeting of the retreat, because that is, colonial, and we are not, we are Indian. So let us all, keep, I don't know what they replaced it with, but this is something that I've also argued over here, that intellectuals themselves, academics and intellectuals, have subscribed to this, and they have believed it ideologically as well, of course, coming as a large proportion has come from the left sphere, that we are delegitimized somehow because we speak right and talk in English. We should revise those terms. We are no less Indian for speaking in English. We feel no less uncomfortable when we go to a foreign country, however much we might like to go, we always come back. We are here. We are here for a reason. We may speak in English. It doesn't make us any less Indian than anybody else who is speaking in any other language. So that's a long argument I have, and I'm not sure whether it answers your question entirely, but it was an attempt to read into this moment the birth of a category culturally and imaginatively rather than as a locus of political sovereignty. I've made that very clear again and again. I've said I'm not in the sense Partho Chatterjee writes I am the people, not in the sense that that the people are the locus of sovereignty, not populism, not in that sense, but in the sense of the imagination, in the sense of culturally you are dreaming a people into existence when you begin to write and talk and sing about them. So this was what I was arguing. Okay, this point about young Bengal, not retreat but accommodation. Sort of compromising with the conservatives, maybe in some way, making space, making room. Radical as a term, I had to look it up because this is not something I knew. When I looked it up, I saw that the word radical, in the sense in which I've used it in the book and in the sense in which political scientists use it also, is actually a very new word in the English language as well. You go to Webster or you go to Oxford English Dictionary and they'll give you the history of the word, and it is in fact only in the late 18th, early 19th century with Godwin and then Shelley, this group of radicals, that the phrase first begins to be used in the English language in the sense in which we still understand it today, which is when we use it to mean extreme, extremists, people who are taking a path that is not in the middle, in fact not accommodative at all. So when you say that they maybe it was not retreat but accommodation, it's a very nuanced field. I don't think abstractions work. In any case, I don't think abstractions work in any domain of cultural history, which is why I've argued also against the notion that there was an inner domain of spiritual life and an outer domain of nationalist life. I don't think domains, especially cultural domains or domains in the mental sphere, quite work like that. Almost every single letter Bankim Chandra ever wrote, that arch nationalist, is in the English language. There is a very complicated relationship between inner and outer in our existence, and I don't think that making generalization helps. So I will not generalize, I will not speculate on whether there is retreat or whether there is accommodation. What I will say is, yes, in their personal lives, I'm sure you will find instances where, and these were commented on as well, when I think Krishna Mohan Bandyopadhyay was asked for his hookah by his friend, I've written about that, by Roshi Krishna, who was of a lower caste anyway, I can't, Dilli Bush, I think the caste category was. But he doesn't want to give it, and finally exasperated, he gives it. And he says, you really shouldn't be asking me to share my hookah because your touch and all of that. So yes, so that's a sort of retreat, isn't it? For a person who, when he was a young man, got into trouble because his friends not only ate beef, but then threw the bones into a neighboring Brahmin's house. And then he was thrown out of his own house for that. So from that extreme position, he's come now to the position where he's reluctant to share his hookah. So yes, it will be conflicted. There will be nuances. Whether that's retreat or accommodation is not important. What is important is, and this is what I'm trying to argue here, is that in these particular instances that I've talked about in the book, they are putting into circulation the grammar and rhetoric of being a modern Indian. The language in which they speak of themselves and their work is the language in which we still speak today. They are the first people, for instance, in Gyan Nation to write, why should the Shudra and the woman not be allowed to hear the Vedas? Why? Why have they put down an injunction like this? Is it not? It's a lovely, and that prose is very alive. It's a lovely passage where he says, you will conduct the yagna, the joggo in Bengal. You will conduct the yagna, which the woman cannot hear and the Shudra cannot hear, and that the same woman will be working the whole morning in the kitchen with smoke stinging her eyes, creating the meal for you, and then you will sit down to that meal. But the woman cannot hear you, and the Shudra cannot hear the Vedas. Why? You know what a wonderful law this is the sarcasm in that article. These are the first people speaking like this about these sacrosanct texts that have come down to us from Vedic time. Again, also the courage to be able to speak like this. What so many people who have read this book in the recent past, the last few days have said to me, my God, can you imagine what would happen today? I mean, some of the things they got up to, if it happened, it really has resonated in that sense in the contemporary India that we inhabit. And there's so many people have said, my goodness, this is what they were doing in 1830, 1840. What would happen if one of our students did this now? Can you imagine? Because we've seen how spaces have shrunk. We've seen how difficult it has become to actually speak up in the way in which these people were speaking up. So I will leave it there to simply say that retreat or accommodation, I'm not sure. It is a nuanced field and we need to look at it in all its nuance. And the last sort of point that was made, appeal not to the mass but to educated people, and that India is still in the making, so why India? Yes, but this is the process of its making. This is when you first begin to imagine India into existence. So you've all read Imagined Communities. I don't need to tell you what Benedict Anderson says there. He talks about novel writing. It's actually there in poetry before it is there in novel writing, interestingly, in the 19th century, because poetry is the predominant form in the 19th century as well. But this is how, in fact, India is being imagined into existence. So that's why India, to be brief. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
Hello, yeah, sorry. Just on the last thing you said, I was thinking that you said that it was already there in poetry before it came to the novel. I was just thinking, instead of looking at it as that 19th century poetry was the dominant form and that is why this happened, maybe if you would like to reflect on whether there is something about poetry which this incipience is something that comes to poetry in a way that can grow into the novel at some point, but it's not just a historical thing, but there is something about the form itself. That's
Do I need the mic or can I just?
Thank you, ma'am, for the enriching talk first. Just a basic question. I was thinking it continuously that when we are referring young Bengal as the first radicals, why not considering Brahmo Samaj? Because the nature of works are common, they're similar actually in nature of blasphemic tone they're using and the reformist work they're considering of doing that. So why not then?
Thank you so much. All your questions have been really good. I mean, very intelligent questions. Thank you for them. You're right in that I shouldn't actually simply say it's because poetry was the predominant form, because that's why poetry came first. Not make it a historical argument, but argue for something that is incipient in poetry, to use your own language, that responds. You're absolutely right about that. Benedict Anderson points to songs, actually songs more than poetry, because it is songs and poetry. So the Vande Mataram itself, if you know the history of that, began as a poem and became metamorphosed into a song and became the rallying cry for the nationalist movement in the late 19th century. This early period also, it is something incipient to poetry. Poetry is affective in a way in which prose is not. Song rouses in a way no novel ever will allow itself to be used. So it is, so Vande Mataram is embedded in Anandamot. And the novel can be described as nationalist and all of that. But it is the song in it that becomes, a vehicle for the transmission of these ideas. And you're right, it is because there is something incipient to it, inherent to the form itself that makes it. So thank you for that. And the Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo Samaj, in fact, were the people in the middle who were called by this group the half-liberals. They were attacked. Prashannakumar Tagore was attacked by Krishnamon Bandyopadhyay, the Inquirer, calling them the half-liberals, because Prashannakumar is espousing the same ideals, but he's having a Durga Puja in his house. So they are half-liberals, this group is truly radical. Extremists to the point where they do not belong to any group, and certainly not to the Brahmo. In fact, it would have made life much easier for them if they had somehow managed to garner the support of the Brahmos at least, because the Brahmos are a very powerful and influential group in 19th century Bengal. So that Brahmos are also very critical of this group, that there is a new generation of young men in Calcutta, he says, and this is there in Land Carpenter. Carpenter recounts this, who are atheists. This is very bad. They don't believe in God. This is dreadful. How can you not believe in God in the 19th century? So Ramon is very upset with them for not having anything whatsoever to do with religion. So this is the accusation brought against them, which is not always entirely true, absolutely not. But they are themselves also at some pains to emphasize that we are not half-liberals like the Brahmo Samaj. These really are the first radicals. They are extremists. They are not to be confused with the middle ground, which was the Brahmo Samaj. Thank you so much.